are from God, that are hungry for the truth, whether they realize that that's what they're hungry for or not. Because Jesus tells us to go into all the world and make disciples, teaching them and baptizing them, meaning we're looking for people that have not been taught, who are not baptized, who are not yet a disciple of Jesus. That is the mission of the church. And so one of the mission statements I was working with is it's our goal to church the unchurched. And I like that because that has an aspect of discipleship and community and all these things. But the people that I vet all of my ideas through, because most of them are bad, kind of immediately came back and said, there's a problem with that. Unchurched people don't want to be churched. We live in a time in our society where it's culturally disadvantageous to be a part of a church body. People don't like church because they don't like what they've seen churches do. Churches wield an immense amount of power because Christians wield an immense amount of power. The problem is, historically, we have handled that power very poorly. So bad, in fact, that when people look at the church, they don't see a countercultural revolution. They don't see Christians living differently than the world. They see Christians living exactly like the world, abusing people, dominating people, and hurting people all the same ways that all the other power structures in our society seem to do. And so the same issues people have with media, and the same issues people have with government, the same issues people have with education, same issues people have with corporate America are now the same issues that people have with the church, because we have handled the immense amount of power that God has given us through his gospel the same way that they've handled the power and positions that we've placed all of those people in. And so the response has been run from abusive systems, and we happen to no longer be the place that people run to. We happen to be one of those abusive systems that people run from. And so everywhere you look, you see the power imbalance being used to advantage certain privileged people, and it absolutely exists in the church today. Anytime you turn on the news, if you're looking in the right places, you can see evidence of this. It was only a couple weeks ago that they were reporting on all of the decades long of sex scandals that were covered up in the Southern Baptist Convention. And don't think that I'm just hating on the Baptists. I think all of us have heard the stories of the sexual abuse covered up by the Catholic Church historically. It was just last year that a Church of Christ preacher in Oklahoma got state and federal charges, going to prison for life because of the sexual crimes he committed against kids in his youth group. And that was, we're talking last year. I've got a good friend of mine. He wanted to be a youth minister. He became the pulpit minister. He's a different church in Oklahoma. He became the pulpit minister the day that his elders called him and said, hey, we need you to step into the pulpit this Sunday. Our minister just went to prison. Why did he go to prison? Because he has been in a sexual relationship with his foster child since she was 15 years old. That's the preacher of their church, right? And at this time she was 19 years old, and so we're talking years of pastoral shepherding from the pulpit, and the whole time covering up this scandal. And it's not just relationships, it's not just sexual temptation. We see this in one of my favorite communicators and Bible teachers of all time grew a really big church in the Northwest, and his platform outgrew his character. And so all the temptations that come from being in a place of power eventually turn into temptation, and way too many guys succumb to that temptation. And so he gets fired for spiritual abuse, for a domineering attitude, for bullying, for plagiarism, basically getting caught trying to get his books on the bestseller list by using the church's money to pay marketing companies to do that for him. And they said, hey, that's probably not a good way to spend God's money. Another great Bible teacher and communicator. You guys remember the Grace, Harvest Bible churches? Their senior pastor getting fired because when they did an internal audit, there were a few $1 million missing. I don't want to get sued for slander or defamation, so allegedly that's what happened. We see it all the time. I mean, just over and over and over and over again, when you put people in power and all the privilege flows up to them, they eventually will use that privilege to take advantage of opportunities that should never have been theirs in the first place. This is the problem with the way we handle the power of the gospel. It's the same issues that we see all throughout society, in all other power structures, all the way up to huge corporations and huge government systems, and all the way down to marriage in the home. You've seen marriages where there is an uneven power dynamic, and instead of that person wielding that position well, they use it to abuse and dominate the other person in the relationship. And so whether we're talking about you and your marriage and your family and you as a parent, or you in the workplace, or you in school, or you in your church, or you in your friend circle, or you as a part of a corporation in your job, however you line it up, there is always a position of power that God is placing you in, and there's always a temptation to handle that very poorly. And so I'm convinced the very same thing that's ruining marriages in Christian homes today is the very same thing that's ruining churches as a whole. And so the response of that is, it doesn't matter how good your church is, it doesn't matter how good your family is, it doesn't matter if you're doing it right. The world around us, they've been fooled enough times by bad power dynamics, by unhealthy systems, that even when we do it well, they look at us and they go, I don't buy it, I don't trust it, I don't want any part of it. Which means we have to get really good at stewarding what God gives us in a way that blesses other people and not just ourselves. So, I want to first go to a text that we covered, I think almost exactly a year ago, if I'm not mistaken. We were in 1 Samuel, and we were looking at how God sets up the governing system over his people. And so we preached several sermons about what good leaders look like and what bad leaders look like at a time when we were reevaluating Riverside's leadership. And so it was a great text to explore. It was a very challenging text for us, because there's a lot of things we would read in this and go, hey, I think we've been messing this up. We've been doing it exactly the way King Saul does it, and that doesn't work out well for King Saul. So before they get King Saul, who was a bad king, and before they make the same mistake that many of us make when a leader abuses the power that he is blessed to receive, our solution isn't to change the direction that the power privilege flows. Our solution is to just change the leader. And so they change out Saul for David, and David's a good guy with a good heart, but being in that position still affords him certain opportunities that he should have never taken. And so David, a good king, was put into a position of power, and that position of power is what enables his great moral failure. This is a good king who's getting people who he's supposed to be in charge of. He's supposed to be their leader. He's getting them killed so that he can sleep with their wife. That is a moral failing that comes from even great kings like David because of the position that he was placed in. The problem is God warns about this. God shows us, if you try this, if you try to use your power structure the way the world does it, if you try to mimic what you've seen in ungodly cultures, if you try to take my power and wield it the way they wield power, it's only going to result in privilege for the leader and misery for every other person. And so Romans chapter 1 verse 16 says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. You guys know the verse? Anybody remember why he's not ashamed of the gospel? For it is the what? Power of salvation. It is the power of God to save us. The gospel of Jesus Christ is the power by which God saves humanity. There is immense power in the Christian church because there is immense power in the gospel of Jesus Christ, and we're not trying to diminish the power. We don't remove the power. We don't remove the leaders. We don't try to remove the authority and position and power from the leaders. We just try to make sure we understand how all of us are supposed to handle the responsibility of being in a position of privilege. 1 Samuel chapter 8, beginning in verse 9. Actually, do we have verse 5 up here? That's what was up here. Thank you. You're right. I'm wrong. So the people are crying out You are old, your sons do not follow your ways. So they're talking to their high priest, who's in this leadership position, and they're saying, your sons are ungodly, they are abusing their power. We don't like the power structure we've seen amongst God's temple and in his church, but we keep looking beyond our borders, we keep seeing what all the other cultures are doing, and we want to be like them. And so they said, now appoint a king to lead us, such as all the other nations have. And so verses 6 through 8 is Samuel, is the high priest going to God and going, God, you've been a good leader, but they don't recognize it. They don't want that. And now they're upset at me, and they think I've been a bad leader, and God's over here like it's not you that they are unhappy with, it's me. They're treating me like I have not been a good, godly leader, and so they're going to replace me with an earthly king, and you're going to let them do it. But here's what's going to happen. And so take a look at this. We'll jump down to verse 9. Now listen to them, but warn them solemnly, and let them know what the king will reign over them will claim as his rights. See, when you're in a position of power, you begin to feel entitled. You get to say, that's my right. Because of my position, I get this privilege. And so you take all the privilege and all the entitlement that comes in a position of privilege. That is power. When a king wields power, he will exert his rights over the people. And then we're going to see a word. It's a Hebrew word that we translate usually as just take. We see this word take 6 times in 7 verses here. So check this out. So Samuel told them all that he tells God that he's asking for a king, and then he says this is what the king who will reign over you will claim as his right. So Samuel's talking to the people, and he's saying, he will take your sons and make them serve as chariots and horses, and they will run in front of his chariots. Some he will assign to be commanders of thousands and commanders of 50s, and others to plow the ground and reap his harvest, and still others he'll appoint to make weapons of war. So in the Hebrew, there's a word that we translate to appoint. So the king is going to take, and he's going to appoint. He's going to claim things as his own, and he's going to put people over certain responsibilities, and he has the power to do that. So he is going to get them to make weapons of war and equipment for charities. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and your vineyards and olive gardens and give them to his attendants. He will take 1/10 of your grain and of your vintage and give it to his officials and attendants, your male and female servants, and the best of your cattle and donkeys he will take for his own use. He will take 1/10 of your flocks, and you yourselves will become his slaves. And when that day comes, you will cry out from relief from the king that you have chosen, but the Lord will not answer you in that day. And the people refuse to listen to him. They say, no, we want a king over us anyway. And so here's God going, here's what happens when you buy into that power structure. Here's what happens when you do it the way the rest of the world does it. You are going to allow them to take and take and take and take from you. That's what happens when people lead like an earthly king. And you see it all over the place, right? When you get promoted, it affords you privilege. And so now you get privileges that the people beneath you don't have. And so the money flows up and the opportunity flows up. The opportunities for advancement flows up. Every privilege gets better the higher up you go. The more influence you have, the better your position, the more power you grab for yourself, the more influence, and then therefore the more opportunity, the more privilege. In other words, you get to take more than the people beneath you because that's your right because of your position. Now, here's the thing. Some of you are looking at that and you're like, if you're a good capitalist, maybe I shouldn't, this is maybe too politicized to make this point, I don't know. I'll say it this way. Do you guys remember like 4 years ago when the word bougie became super popular amongst teens? Everybody's going like, oh, that's so bougie. You guys know why that word became common to our American vernacular, right? You guys understand how that word became so popular as we see the leftists, and I'm not making a political statement one way or the other, as we see certain people in our society get frustrated with the current power dynamics. They start going, they shouldn't have that much power. That's not what should be allowed. We need to equalize all that power. And so you have a whole generation picking up John Marx, reading about Marxism, reading through the Communist Manifesto and books like that. And all of that is just about this class system that is the bourgeois versus the proletariat. And so that's all it is there's the bourgeois, they have all the power, they're getting to do all this stuff, and all of us regular proletarian people need to rebel against that and have a revolution and overthrow them so that we can equalize the power. The problem is every time we've tried that throughout human history, the people that have the revolution get in positions of power and then start doing exactly the same thing. And so notice that God never rebukes this. He doesn't say it's wrong. In fact, he says it's their right. It's the right of people in position. It's the privilege that affords them. And if you're a good capitalist, as most Americans are, in a capitalist society, we believe that, well, there's a reason you get the privilege. It's because if you're in that position, you're also taking the risk. And so he who takes the most risk should receive the most privilege. We won't get into any of that. That gets real political real quick. But that's the basic assertion, is that this isn't bad, this isn't wrong, this is theirs by right. And God's not wrong by suggesting this. It's not wrong to have people in leadership positions. It's not wrong to have people that wield great influence. It's just wrong to put them in a position where their character cannot keep up with their platform, and it almost guarantees at some point there's going to be so many opportunities, which is just a better word for temptation. There's going to be so many temptations that this person will fail. And when they fail, they will hurt all the people under them that they were supposed to protect and take care of. And we call this wrong. We call this abuse. We call this oppression. And the people in power go, no, that's just my right. And so the thing that the church has to figure out is, what do we do about this? Because the way we've been handling positions of authority within the church structure looks exactly like the way we handle it in government and in business and in education and in media and in any position of power that has any influence over society and over this sort of social engineering. In all of that, when we start doing it that way, we see people begin to abuse that power in the one power structure that should never abuse the people over whom they have influence. We look at it and we go, man, what the church is doing is so wrong. And we all know it. And at this point, we've got nowhere to run to. We can't run from the church to government. We can't run from government to church. There's just no system that we can trust. And so we have a whole generation of young people that go, the only truth I buy into is the truth of my friends, is the people in my tribe, because I can't trust any leader that's not within my inner circle because they all handle it badly. I don't want to be a part of it. I don't want to be a part of those systems, and that includes the church. And so here we are with the gospel truth of the creator of the universe and all the power and influence that comes with that. We have the answer to hope and the questions of life. We have a book of love. We have a step-by-step love letter from God to you about how to live a life with purpose and meaning that will result in an eternal reward. It's a good news message of Jesus Christ, and people go, I don't want that because I've witnessed how you've handled it for so long throughout history in the last 2,000 years. It wasn't long at all before the New Testament church began to use their power for their own sordid gain. And so at some point, the church stops being a gathering of people, and it starts being a place that you go to. And so churches start buying property, and they start building schools, and they start influencing government. And then throughout some point of Roman Catholicism, they literally were the government. And then even after that, when there was separation between church and state throughout Europe, the church still influenced the government, so much so that the government couldn't make decisions without getting approval from the church. That's how the entire Church of England started, when the Pope wouldn't give the king the answer he wanted. So he says, fine, I'll find my own Pope and form my own church, right? We've seen the abuses of power throughout history, so much so that people have just rebelled from it. We have the Reformation, the global Reformation, where people go, I see as this huge universal church which in Latin, universal, we call that the Catholic Church in Latin. In English, universal church. We see this big universal church wielding their power to literally kill anybody that disagrees with them. You look at the inquisitions that have happened throughout history, and we go, that looks really bad. I don't want to be a part of that. And so an entire generation of people just rebel against that and go, let's just be the church. And so they reform the church. We get our Protestant denominations. In our church's history, a couple hundred years ago, a group of people go, man, we see all of these denominations, and they're putting people in positions that are leading to situations of abuse and dominance over the people that they're supposed to care for. There's so much extra stuff in this. They've gotten away from just being the church, and so they left that. We have the American Restoration Movement, which the Churches of Christ came out of. That's a movement to just ignore all of that and just get back to being the church again. And then you fast forward a couple hundred years, and we go, man, we're doing the exact same thing. People are running from even the good churches because of the reputation of all of the bad churches. My wife went to a wedding this weekend of a good friend of ours, and then this morning she is visiting a church that when she was a baby, her dad was the preacher at. And so she's visiting this church because they've invited all former members and everybody that has a connection to that church to celebrate the last Sunday that they're going to happen. This is unfortunately not that sad anymore. In our particular tribe of churches, we're seeing hundreds and hundreds of churches close every year. We've lost our ability to wield the gospel authority of Jesus Christ because of the reputation we carry as a church here in our country. And so she's with them now, celebrating what's going to be their very last Sunday service before they shut their doors forever in that little congregation. And that is that's constant. That's happening all over the place. She's at a church in Texas. Believe me, it's happening here faster. There's a few states that are insulated from this. Here in Louisiana, we are losing churches of Christ and Protestant churches faster than a lot of other states are, all because we all have a reputation problem. We've handled it so poorly. And then you factor in the fact that we've come up with really poor solutions to how to solve it. And so when churches go, let's start by, a minister abuses his power and hurts other people, and they go, well, the problem is the person, so they replace the person. They don't change the position, they don't change the power dynamic, they just replace the person. And it finds out that the next person is going to be tempted by the same things. And even if they're not, even if they're of more moral character than the previous guy, if that church does its job and that church begins to influence its community and they begin to grow, eventually that church is going to scale beyond the character of the person in the pulpit. And you're going to see the same problem again as long as power equals privilege in our churches. So some churches go, okay, well, let's just remove the authority. Let's remove the influence of our leaders. Let's make sure our leaders don't have too much power, don't have too much influence. And then what we discover is the more we try to diminish the position that they are in, we end up diminishing the impact that they have. And so our leaders, our pastor, teachers, evangelists, prophets, this is Ephesians chapter 4, verse 10, 11, 12, they are given to the church by God to equip the church so that the church can be equipped for the work of service, for the building up of the body, and for the unity of faith. That's Ephesians 4, 12. The problem is as we remove their ability to influence people in order to protect the people, we remove their ability to positively impact people as well. And it turns out that's a really bad solution. That's how you get really small struggling churches that are no longer able to grow and send out the gospel into their community. The only thing they're able to do is just slowly die because they have unformed, unequipped people in their midst. So the answer is, what do you do? How do we fix this issue, this reputation in our churches? How do we teach people in their marriage, in their home, in their church, in their schools, in their work environment, in their government system, their ability, the way they vote? I mean, for every aspect of your life, how do we teach those people to handle their influence well? And so that's, if you are somebody that is formally educated, to the degree that which you are formally educated, that affords you a certain amount of influence over people. It affords you position. It affords you a certain amount of power. And we're kind of beyond that season where we think education is like the ultimate way to gain and use and access power. I think we've moved beyond that as a society, but it's still a huge influencer. If you're somebody that has a lot of money, you know probably better than other people. It affords you a certain amount of privilege and power that other people don't have. And so you've all heard the stories. There's really big, ugly stories, and then there's small, funny stories of people that use the power that they gain from just having money to exert their will over the people around them. And so one of the most harmless times was one of my first or second year in the pulpit. We were teaching Bible class. We had a small number of people, and so I was trying to get everyone over to one side. No, I think it was a singing night, actually. We're trying to get everybody to sing together. So like, hey, let's all sit close together so we can sing. And everybody moved over except for one elder's wife. And I look over, I'm like, well, do you want to join us? And she says, I paid for this pew. I can sit in it. And we all laughed because we're like, all right, that's fine. And it was funny, and we all kind of chuckled about it. And she wasn't wrong. When that church needed pews, they asked certain families to all put forth money to pay for individual pews. And so they literally had pews that they thought they themselves paid for. Like, I didn't pay for that one, but I paid for this one. And so this is where I sit. In even the smallest ways, we will use any advantage we have to exert our will over other people so that we can get our way because we believe we are entitled to do so because of the position that we are in. That's power. That's the influence that power brings us in whatever shape or form it takes. Now, Jesus has a very different solution. His solution is not diminish the power in the position. The solution is not to just change the person and hopefully you find the guy that just has more moral fortitude than anybody else you've ever met. That's not his answer either. His answer is, which direction does the power flow? And by the way, next week I'll give you a different answer, and that is, what is the source of the power? That one should be pretty obvious to you. I'm a preacher of the gospel, so I'm going to tell you that the source of the power is Jesus Christ. But I do want to show it to you in the text. I think it'll be a blessing to you. This week I want to focus on, which way does the power flow? Which way does the privilege that power affords you flow? Let's take a look at John chapter 13. I want you to see how Jesus behaves in a very unique situation. I want you to ask yourself if you would behave the same way. I've been praying over this text for days now, and I still stumble with it. I don't know that I would handle it the same way. And I know that I need to. I know that I'm trying to. If I'm going to be a minister of the gospel in the Lord's church, if I'm going to wield all of the influence and position and power and platform that position affords me, if I'm going to do that, then I've got to do it very carefully and learn to do it very well, which means I've got to learn to do it the way Jesus looks. And when I look at this, I go, man, that's so different than what we're taught. That's so different than what we see. Check this out. Take a look. It was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. All of this, the first few verses, is just John informing us what Jesus already knows. And so he already knows, because we see this later on. This isn't just that John knew it, but Jesus doesn't know it yet. Jesus already knows that Judas is planning to betray him. In fact, later on, we won't get to this verse this morning, later on, he's even going to call Judas out and go, I know what you're about to do it quickly. So he already knows, okay? So he knows that his hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Not only that, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. And this evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. And so Jesus knows this. He already knows that Judas is already planning to betray him. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power. There's a few times in Scripture where Jesus calls this out. He goes, all authority has been given to me. All power has been given to me. In fact, right before he commands the church, your mission as a church is to go into all the world and preach the gospel and make disciples, teach them, baptize them, and turn them into people that will go into all the world and preach the gospel and make disciples. Before he says that, he begins that statement by going, all authority and power has been given to me, and I'm now charging you by that authority to wield that authority to go into the world and preach the gospel. So Jesus is not dodging power. He's not afraid of power. He doesn't see power as a bad thing. Jesus just knows how to handle it differently. And so here's what Jesus knows. I have to go be with the Father. Judas is about to betray me so that that can happen. And God just gave me all the power to do something about it. What do you do in that situation? If you wield all the power and you find out somebody that you've cared for and loved on and spoken life into is about to betray you, what do you do? Have you ever been betrayed before? Anybody? This happens in the church, man. People that you love, people that you disciple, people that you influence, people that you spend time with. If you're in ministry, you have these moments where people will allow you to just drop in on the most vulnerable parts of their life. The parts of their life that it would take years of building a relationship with for them to even tell you about some of the junk that's going on in their heart and in their life. If you're a minister, you just get to be dropped in right in the middle of that. They just call you up and go, hey, I need you at my house right now. We got to pray together. And you get there, and they just let you in on some stuff that you know, if it wasn't for your position, you would never be able to be in this moment. And so your job then is to love on them and care for them and to speak life over them and to open their eyes to the beauty of Christ so that they can to wield a power beyond their own ability to control their situation, lean on Him and not themselves. And you just do everything you can to bless this person. And when those people betray you, if you don't know what I'm talking about, stick around the church long enough, guys. It's going to happen. We're flawed people. It's the people close to us that have the most ability to disappoint us. And so if you know what it's like, and I know what it's like, Jesus knows what it's like to be betrayed by somebody that He loves, by somebody that He disciples, by somebody that He spent time with. One of His closest people in His inner circle is selling Him out for some silver. What a betrayal. I know, but for me, I mean, recently it's been in a season where I've just felt betrayed by church people often. I mean, betrayed in the ugliest of ways. And maybe that's fair because I'm not the easiest person to offend, right? Because I usually, like, if you insult me, I'm like, yeah, I see it, right? Or I just don't understand that you're trying to insult me. I remember one time I had a deacon in the church, and this guy was speaking more about his own stuff. He's like 3 months away from the whole church finding out that he's been having an affair and he's leaving his wife and all this kind of stuff. So he's like got his own stuff, and the way that we take our own mess and we project that onto other people. He calls me up. He's mad at me one day, and so I go and I sit with him, and he starts off the conversation by going, you know, Andrew, I just don't think, this wasn't here, by the way, I'm not talking about us, okay, just so y'all know. He goes, you know, Andrew, I just don't think you're the most spiritual person in this church. And me and my just stupidity, I am immediately in agreement with him. And so I didn't realize it was an insult. I didn't know. And so I'm just immediately like, oh, yeah, I know. Who do you think it is? Probably Miss Sue. You think it's Miss Sue? You think she's the most spiritual? I think it's probably her. And then I see him get real frustrated and angry at me in my response. And then I realize, oh, he's trying to insult me right now. That's what this is. And so I understand that you really have to hit below the belt if your intention is to wound me, because I'm just sometimes just too. I'm one of those. I had a friend tell me one time, he's like, Andrew, you are the dumbest smart person I've ever met, which is kind of a compliment, I guess. But he's right, because there's some things that I get and I can process well, and there's other things I'm just dumb about. And so I really didn't know that his goal was to wound me. And so people, if they're like, I want to wound this guy, they just hit below the belt. And so they find the things that you don't even know you're self-conscious about, and they use it against you. And man, if you've ever had that happen to you, it hurts, right? It hurts when people betray you, when people sell you out, and when people use their own mess to justify treating you like something that's less than human. And they stop seeing you as a person, they just start seeing you as a type of person. As long as they don't humanize you, then they can just throw whatever rocks they want at you. And when people do that to you, what do you want to do to them? When people do that to you, especially when God's like, hey, you've got all the power in this situation, right? All the power, all of my power and all of my righteousness, my righteous authority for you to do whatever you want to this person in this situation. All the power is yours, and this person just betrayed you. What do? Anybody here love to get revenge? I married a good woman, y'all, and so when people, if I feel truly, like, deeply betrayed, I mean, you get murderous, right? You're just like, oh, this person, oh, what I want to do to them. And you don't do it because you're a Christian and you're trying to be like Jesus, and so you say no. And then my next response is, I'll just be petty. And I like coming up with petty ideas to get revenge. And I'm glad that I married a woman that like, I'll be like, you know what we should do? And I'll give her my idea, and she'll smile. And she's kind of smirking because she's like, that's clever, and I appreciate it. But then she goes, yeah, but we can't do that. And I go, I know we can't, but it feels good to say, right? I want to. And I'm in a position where I could, and I could get away with it, and it would be fun for both of us. And you know, that's us, right? That's us in our humanity. We think that way. When people betray us, our first response is, I've got all the cards. I've got the stacked deck. I've got the power. I've got the position. I've got the influence. I've got the authority. I've got the hearts of the people. I can destroy this person. And Jesus is in exactly the same position. And look at what he does. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power. So understand the flow of the text. Jesus knows that Judas just betrayed him. Jesus knew that God has put all things under his power. So, that's an important so. Knowing this, knowing these two things, knowing he has all the power, he got up from the meal and he took off his outer clothing and wrapped a towel around his waist. And after that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. All the disciples, including Judas. Including the one that betrayed him. Who does that? I mean, look around the world today. Look at how people wield positions of power and tell me, who does this? Where are the people? Where are the godly people that when they have all the power, they go to the people that hurt them most, and their choice is to love them and to serve them and then ultimately to die for them? He doesn't say, you're about to betray me, you leave the table, but I'm going to wash their feet. He goes, no, I'm going to wash all your feet. All of you get my love. All of you get my service. All of you are deserving of my grace and my forgiveness, regardless of what you've done to me. Who does that? For Jesus, power doesn't flow up. The more power and influence he has, the more power God places under his feet doesn't equate to more privilege and more opportunity for sin and more temptation that he has to struggle through. That's not how Jesus wields his power. To Jesus, power flows down. If I have power, how can I use that power to serve other people? Not to be served. I didn't come to be served, but to serve. And so when God gives me more power, I use it to serve more, to love more, to give more. And whether that's your money or your position or your parenting style or the way you are with your friend group, every friend group has somebody that wields the majority of the power. If you don't believe me, just go, hey, where should we go eat, and see who speaks first. You'll get a bunch of I don't knows, and you'll get one person that knows exactly where the whole group feels like eating, whether they realize that or not, right? There's always somebody in the social dynamic, whether it's their charisma or otherwise, that wields a position of influence over the people around them. And all I'm saying is that's not bad. Influence isn't bad. Power isn't bad. You just got to make sure it flows the right direction. Does all the privilege flow up to you, or does it flow down? I love... When Les, our deacon over Buildings and Grounds, when Les put up the signs for handicap parking, senior citizen parking, and visitor parking, he never once came to me and said, hey, where should I put the pastor parking sign, right? We don't do that, right? I park way in the back, and I joked recently about having a parking spot. It's really just more habit, not privilege, right? But a lot of churches do that, right? If you're the pastor, you get special parking. There's one really big church with a real young pastor that everybody loves. In their church, when he walks into a room, the whole church stands up, right? And they see it as that's because of his position. It's his influence. Ultimately, it's his power, and it's the privilege that power affords. The problem is temptation always disguises itself as opportunity. And the more power you have, the more opportunities come your way. The more chances you get, the more you can do with the influence and the platform that you inhibit. And so the temptation comes in the form of opportunity, and there's always a point where the position you're in outpaces the character of your heart. And those opportunities, those temptations begin to be too big to say no to. And so we see the same mistakes over and over and over. Any power structure where all the power flows up, and all the privilege and all the opportunity flows up to the people wielding the authority, always results in exactly the same fall over and over and over again. All Jesus did, he doesn't remove the person of power, he doesn't remove the position, he doesn't diminish the power. All Jesus does and go, let's change the direction that the power flows. Let's change the direction that the privilege flows. It's not going to come to me. It's not going to all flow up to me. It's going to flow down and out from me. As long as I am in this position to be your mentor and to be the person discipling you, I have to make sure that the power flows down. And so I will get up, instead of getting my revenge, I will get up and I will take my towel and I will wash the feet of the people that betrayed me, and I will treat them as equals to the people who I know love me deeply. He pours the water. He begins to wash their feet. You see Peter. Let's remember that this is shortly before Peter denies Jesus, right? It's when it costs you nothing, it's easy to do the right thing. Lord, are you going to wash my feet? He says. In other words, he goes, God, who are you to wash my feet, right? You're him. You've got the power, right? You're the Messiah. You're the one. I should be washing your feet. See, Peter understands the traditional power structure, doesn't he? In his mind, if you're in the position of authority, then that means I'm supposed to serve you, because that's what kings do, right? Kings take. And the more that kings take, Peter's sitting here going, you're the one. I should be washing your feet. What are you doing trying to wash my feet? And Jesus goes, you don't realize what I'm doing, but later you'll understand. I know you don't get how important this is, but this is so important that we get this right. You can't think that way anymore, Peter. You can't wield power that way, because there's going to be a day where all of my power becomes all of your power through the power of the Holy Spirit. And you're going to do even greater miracles than I did. You're going to be the one wielding the position and wielding the power and wielding the authority. That's what my church is going to do. So you've got to get this. You've got to see me wield my power to serve you and love you instead of just take from you. He goes, you don't even know how important it is what I'm doing right now, but one day you will. And Peter's like, no, you should never wash my feet. And then Jesus says this, unless I wash your feet, you shall have no part of me. I'll say it a different way. Don't buy into power structures that take. Don't subscribe to this power dynamic in your life. Don't accept it in your marriage. You single or dating people, don't accept this in the person that you want to spend your life with. Don't accept this in your home when you're parenting your children. This is why the end of chapter 5 or the beginning of chapter 6, I don't remember, I think beginning of chapter 6. This is why Ephesians chapter 6 tells parents, don't dominate over your kids, don't lord over your kids, don't exasperate your kids. This is why, because in every power dynamic, this opportunity presents itself. And so here's Peter buying into what tradition has taught him. I'm supposed to wash your feet. And here's Jesus going, don't take part in that. Don't do it that way. If you don't let me do this for you, if you don't let me display my power through love and service to you, you can't be a part of this. You will have no part of me. I have to wash you. And let's not ignore the symbolism that he's pointing out. You can't save yourself. You can't wash yourself. You can't make yourself clean. I have to do that for you. The best way that I can serve you is by saving you, and only I can make you clean. You've got to be washed. And maybe we can follow up. I'm at 45 minutes. We won't follow up. He says, no, you shall never wash my feet. There's some really cool biblical symbolism. We'll teach it sometime. He says, unless I wash your feet, you have no part of me. And then Peter, in all of his earnestness, this is precious to see. We love Peter for this heart that he has. He goes, if that's it, if that's the case, if the only way I can have a part of you is if you wash my feet, then I want the whole part of you. So don't just wash my feet, but wash my hands and my head as well. And Jesus, I imagine he would have to chuckle at this point. He almost laughs him off. He says, those who have had a bath need only to wash their feet. That's some of you, by the way. Some of you, you've been baptized, you've been washed, you've been made clean, but you know you've started wielding power the wrong way. You've started buying into this traditional power structure. You know that you've allowed your position and your privilege to tempt you with opportunities that you shouldn't be messing with. And so as sin creeps back into our life, as we start living that way again, if we start taking advantage of the position we're in to do stuff that God knowingly disapproves of, and we just do it because we think it's our right, the more we do that, even though we've been washed, sometimes you've got to repent. I'll say it plainly. Some of you have been baptized. That doesn't mean you don't have to repent. Peter has been washed. He's taken a bath, but that doesn't mean he doesn't need Jesus to clean his feet. He says those who have had a bath need only to wash their feet. And there's some of you in here this morning. You know you're saved. You know you belong to him. You've been baptized. You've been washed. You've been raised up in newness of life. But the more you give into those sin temptations, the more you've got to come to him and go, God, make me clean again. Forgive me of what I've done. Give me your grace and your forgiveness. I know that I'm saved, but I want to be clean. And so he says, if you're clean, he says, their whole body is clean. So I wash their feet, their whole body is clean. And then he says, Peter, you are clean. And he says, but not every one of you. He kind of side-eyes Judas, right? Not every one of you is clean, for he knew who was going to betray him. And that was why he said not everyone was clean. That's how Jesus wields the position that he's in. I know I got to close this up. Let me make a couple points. I know I'm talking a lot about the church dynamic, the church world, and our ability to influence our community as a church. That's important to me. I hope that's important to you. I hope you know that this influences every part of your life. Ephesians chapter 5 begins with, halfway through Ephesians chapter 5, it's probably like verse 12 or 13. The last section of that chapter begins with Jesus saying, wives, submit yourselves to your husbands. And then there's a place in 1 Corinthians where he explains that wives, you're going to wear a symbol of submission on your forehead. And then Paul kind of relates it to head coverings and talks about it that way. But he says it in Ephesians chapter 5, wives, submit yourself to your husbands. And we've had generations wield that power dynamic quite poorly, haven't we? We've seen husbands who take that and they go, yeah, I'm the king of my castle. I get to do whatever I want. And they take that little bit of power that God gave them by saying, wives, submit yourself to your husband. And they use it to dominate over and abuse the person that they're supposed to love and protect. They forget that right after that, he says, husbands, love your wives the way Jesus loves the church, willing to give his life up for her. They miss that it was never a position of privilege. It's a position of power and great influence. Being the head of your household, men, next week's Father's Day, so hear me. Men, being the head of your household is absolutely a position of power and influence. It's not supposed to be a position of privilege. It's a position of sacrifice. He says, love your wives the way that Jesus loves the church, willing to die for her. That's what it means. Wives, submit yourselves to men like that. Men who don't use that power to abuse and domineer, but use that power to love their wives sacrificially, right? And so in every aspect of your life, this teaching that power shouldn't flow up to the position of privilege. Power should flow down. Privilege should flow out. The blessings go out from the source of power, not up to the source of power. And that should be happening even in your home. And so the question is, Jesus says, if I'm going to be in power, I'm going to use it to bless and serve others. The question is, how do you wield your power? We had an entire women's movement in America just in response to this. The women's movement that started with going, hey, I think we should be able to work and vote because this whole marriage thing isn't working out to our advantage. And they're going, and there's like a lot of reports of this, I'm not making this stuff up, of women feeling like, hey, this marriage thing, this is a good deal for the husband, but a bad deal for me because it kind of makes us maids and sex slaves. That's tacky, but you guys understand. That's not me. I mean, that's an entire movement of women who were claiming that we don't like what happens in the homes in marriage because all the privilege goes one way and not to us. We feel abused and dominated over, and we want to get out of that situation. And our country has been moving to remove that situation for several decades now, right? And it's all just a response to an abuse of power in the home, where we weren't teaching men, if you're gonna be in this position of authority and power, you have to use it to serve and love sacrificially. You have to be willing to die for her. In other words, it's about her more than it's about you. And look, when godly women see men like that, they go, I could submit to that. We don't, it's an untrue statement in the church that women are supposed to submit to men. That's not true. That's not in the Bible. It's a true statement that wives are supposed to submit to their husbands. And so what I always teach is if you're one of those young ladies that go, I'm not submitting to any man, good, don't marry those. When you find the guy you will submit to, when you find the person that loves you sacrificially, it will be easy to submit to somebody that will give their life up for you, because you know whatever happens, it's in your best interest. It's a position of power that is used to serve and not abuse. So the question is not, what do we do with the power? The question is, which direction does it flow? I want to finish very quickly with John chapter 19. Pilate and Jesus are talking. Jesus has been arrested. He's been brought before the government. Pilate has the opportunity to crucify him and win the approval of the Jews, or to set him free and win the approval of his own moral conscience. And he's trying to navigate this well. And so he's talking to Jesus. He goes, where do you come from? He asked Jesus, but Jesus gave no answer. And Pilate says, do you refuse to speak to me? Don't you realize I have power either to free you or to crucify you? So here's Pilate making the same mistake you and I make, where you go, don't you realize I've got the power? I've got the power to decide this. And Jesus says this, you would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. The only reason you have the power that you have, wherever you are in life, whatever your position is, whatever your identity is, and where you sit in your social circle and in your home and in your workplace, wherever you're at, however high you've climbed in the power dynamics and the corporate ladder, or whatever system you are subscribing to, whatever power you have, Jesus is reminding you, I know you think you've got the power, but it's given to you by God. God has given you a place of power and authority in the world today. Every one of us, to somebody. There is some sphere of influence that you have over people around you. And some people have a really big sphere of influence, and some people it's much smaller and therefore probably more important. And so whatever power you wield, don't make the mistake of thinking you've got the power. Understand that the power you have is given to you by God. You just get to decide which direction is the privilege going to flow. Amen. Will you love them? Will you serve them? Will you give your life for the people that God is calling you to impact? Don't shirk the power. Don't get rid of the influence and the authority that you possess. It's good and it's right for you to step up and to step into that position. You've just got to be so careful about how you handle it. Jesus uses his power to love you, to serve you, and ultimately to save you. And then he calls you to be like him and give that to other people. And so I want to ask you this morning, how are you going to wield the power that you have? Which direction will that privilege flow? If you're one of those people where you know you've been doing it wrong, you belong to Jesus, but you haven't been doing it Jesus' way, you've been washed, maybe you just need to get your feet clean. Maybe you've been baptized, you're a part of the kingdom of God. Maybe you just need to come forward and repent and go, I have not stewarded my position well, and I want to do better. And if you want to do that this morning, we'd ask you to come forward as we stand and as we sing.